I'm going to just quickly talk a little bit about the health benefits of honey. And you've all got a handout that's got that I'm going to talk about. It's also got some tips about cooking with it. And I'm not going to go, I was planning on talking a little more about it, but there's not really any need. Most of the information is here. I'll talk to you a little bit about why I like it so much. But raw honey isn't heated at all. It's got all its enzymatic activity in place. The thing about raw honey is it contains a huge amount of minerals, amino acids, and live enzymes. Most of the literature I read said at least 5,000. And heating that instantly damages it. The higher you go, the more you're killing all of it. That's the stuff that's most beneficial to you. That's the stuff that putting it in your body, it's helping do some of the work. So when you read about some of the really amazing benefits, and a lot of this is heavily researched. You can find that there's a page of links, and most of those links are for doing a little more homework about the health benefits and a little bit more about cooking. I didn't put any producers. Laurie gave you a really good list of places to buy honey. They all contain beneficial bacteria. It's also a very good topical. It's antimicrobial. There's so many positive things in raw honey. Now, and unfiltered honey. Honey can be raw and filtered. It's going to have less of the pollen, some of the stuff that you look for. A lot of people are looking for local honey because of allergies. That's the biggest thing you hear about right now is allergy issues. And people really do see a huge difference, especially eating local raw honey. It doesn't happen in one season. If you stick with it, over a few seasons you'll see a big difference. There are other people that do other bee products, which you guys didn't talk about any other bee products, but bee pollen, royal jelly, propolis, things like that. All of those bee products are really helpful for any kind of allergy issues. When you filter it, you lose some of that. There's still going to be some benefit to it, but it's not going to be as nutrition dense as the raw stuff is. One thing that's really important, and you may have read this before, you should never ever feed honey to a baby under 1 year old. And I hear a lot of this stuff and I'm like, you know what, we all survived, and this is actually different, because what it is a baby's system is the perfect environment for botulism. And there are very, very, very small amounts of botulism in most honey. It will never hurt an adult. It doesn't mean anything. A baby is its perfect environment, and it will run rampant in a baby, and it's very, very dangerous. So no honey ever for a baby under 1 year old. That's the only warning I ever give about food. Mostly, I think we can handle it better than people give us credit for.
18 months.
18 months.
Yeah.
Okay, that's probably safer. But at least a year, always. Some of the things we use honey for, but as a matter of fact, all through history, as you were saying, people have used honey. But traditionally it was reserved only for royalty. It was used for embalming. It was used in rituals. It was special. It wasn't something that your average person put in their tea. It wasn't until it was much more available that people started to really use it. But a salve of honey is often good for people who have trouble with an antibiotic cream that may not be working. People with diabetes and sores can often benefit from a salve made of honey, just good raw honey, as opposed to an antibiotic. You've probably all heard about using it for beauty things, masks, hair, stuff like that, because it's a natural humectant. It draws moisture and keeps moisture. It's one of the reasons it's great to cook with. It's a hygroscopic sugar, which means it draws moisture. It's the reason when you bake with it, you get beautiful, moist, chewy bars and cookies, or you get nice, rich cake. It's because it keeps all that moisture in. It also, when baking, gives you a beautiful golden brown texture, and obviously flavor. That's really the biggest thing. You can use honey if you want to replace sugar in most recipes. In most baking recipes, you can get away with changing it out. You've got to adjust the amount a little bit. You've got to adjust your liquid a little bit, and you need to add a little bit of baking soda because, as you're saying, the pH is very different than sugar. It's acidic. which interferes with leavening, so you need to adjust it a little. It's not that difficult to do, and if you're really into honey, it's some pretty easy math before you start your recipes. When it comes to storing honey, one of the great things is honey does not go bad. It all crystallizes. It doesn't go bad because it doesn't have enough moisture to support any pathogens. It's much like any of you that were here for the raw milk talk, that because of exclusion, there's little or no way that pathogens can live in raw milk, and it's very much the same with honey. It does not support it. So it's funny that they make you pasteurize it at all, because it sort of seems that by pasteurizing it, you're opening it up to ferment and do things that could turn it unhealthy. Whereas in nature, it's...
Can I jump in here and
Yeah.
say something? We have a rule at our house that when you're having tea, even if you're making tea for everybody, you have to use a clean spoon every time you dip into the honey jar. Because if you go into even just plain hot water, and go back to the jar, you bring the moisture with it, and you're upsetting the moisture content of the honey. And it actually can happen that if the moisture content of the honey goes off from what it's supposed to be stable at 18%, it'll go rancid.
That's what
Taste the
it
difference.
will actually ferment, right, and that's it. And that's why you gotta be careful to make sure it's tightly capped too, because again, it's hygroscopic, it will draw moisture from the environment.
Right.
So if it's not covered, it will get more liquid in it, and it can change its safety, but also it will eventually break down its flavor, it won't have as good a flavor. All decent honey, not the squeezy bear that you buy at the store for $1. But all honey will crystallize with time. Some of it will do it quicker than others. It has to do with what's in it. But if it crystallizes and you prefer it liquid, see when it crystallizes for me, I still just scoop in there and put it in my honey, or spread it on toast, it works fine. But if you want it to be liquid again, and sometimes if you're cooking with it, if you're gonna make, I use it a lot in salad dressings. I would use it in a glaze, anything like that. I use a lot in a lot of things. I make cookies with it, I make scones with it, I make marshmallows with it. Yeah. And I do make a lot of salad dressings with it. It's also pretty good in sangria this time of year. Skip the sugar in your sangria, whisk in a little bit of honey, it's awesome. But if you want it to be liquid, and for something like the sangria, you might want it to be liquid, you can put it in a bowl of warm water. I wouldn't go any warmer than that, you don't want to heat it. What you're saying, 35 degrees centigrade, you said what, it was about 95 degrees. That's not very warm at all. So I would warm some water and set it in warm water, and it'll always come back to liquid that way. But if you keep it sealed tight, preferably in the dark, in a relatively dry environment, it will stay good for apparently centuries. and just people have been keeping bees since about the 7th century. I mean, that we know of. That's why it's funny that they tell you to do all those things, because I don't know how the bees ever survived before we sprayed them with crap. They did fine without us. They do fine without us. And they did fine for a millennium before that. So, those are, I guess, and the other thing, you really should store your honey at room temperature. It keeps it, it'll crystallize faster if you put it in the refrigerators. Keep it stable. You want to keep its temperature stable. That being said, if your house is 90 degrees, you might want to let it live someplace cool in your house. It might be a little too hot. Or if, like my house, it's like, 60 all winter, that might be a little chilly for you, but it should be fine.
Do you know at what temperature the enzymes and amino acids and minerals get destroyed?
Most things start to die at about 130 degrees. By 140, they're gone.
Okay.
Well then, baking cookies is more than 140.
That's right.
The water in
That's
your
why
tea
I
is more than
don't.
140.
That's right. That's why I don't bake with good honey. The cookies I made, there's no honey in that cookie. The middle is whipped honey.